And now I would like to introduce today's special guest. Is the world flat? Well, the flat world metaphor, made so popular by Thomas Friedman's recent book, has become almost a commonplace way to describe our new global world model. If the world is getting flat, it's also creating tremendous new opportunities for countries around the globe. In the past months, we've welcomed many distinguished speakers to this podium to discuss Canada's role in the new economy. We've listened to views on how we can best fit into this emerging new paradigm by looking at changes underway in the areas of finance, education, and foreign policy. It's a new world, and it can be exhilarating. As Friedman illustrates, recent advances in technology and business practices have opened the doors of opportunity for innovators and entrepreneurs around the world. Interconnectivity, cooperation, multilateralism, these are all positives fostered by and in turn fostering a flat world, one in which people living in Canada can benefit as much as those living in Nigeria or India. But is the world truly flat? It remains unflat in one fundamental way. There are still very many people getting very sick. Even one of the chief architects of the flat world, Bill Gates, has said, "It's shocking how little research is directed toward the diseases of the world's poorest countries." Declining fertility rates and increasing lifespan are causing an increase in the median age of the world's population. The world is facing an onslaught of diabetes and an epidemic of obesity. And then there is the pandemic of HIV/AIDS. These are among the greatest challenges of our time, and there isn't a country in the world that isn't wrestling with them to some extent or other. Here in Canada, we do have advantages at our disposal. We are a wealthy nation. We possess a strong knowledge base. Our guest speaker today will discuss how we can use these advantages in the new world. Dr. Alan Bernstein is the president of the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. The CIHR is the Government of Canada's lead health research funding agency. An internationally respected researcher, mentor, and scientific leader, he has made key contributions to our understanding of embryonic development, blood cells, and cancer. In his capacity as president of the CIHR, Dr. Bernstein has spoken to Parliament, advising the government that Canada can build a globally competitive economy, reduce the escalating costs of healthcare, and build a healthier, more productive society. I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say today, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Alan Bernstein to the podium as he helps us understand how Canada can become a superpower in our flattening world. Dr. Bernstein.
Thank you very much, Noella. I'm really pleased to see so many people I actually know in the audience, but I must tell you I'm even more pleased to see these 5 tables of young people who are here today. Now, I'm told that there'll be a Q's and A's after my talk. I think what I should be doing is asking the young people who hear the questions and expecting you guys to give the answers when my talk is finished. So you got to pay attention, right? I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you today. The Canadian Club has a long and proud history as a welcoming forum where ideas on how Canada should move forward in a rapidly changing world can be presented and discussed. Je suis très heureux d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. Le Canadian Club est depuis longtemps reconnu comme un forum qui favorise l'échange d'idées et la discussion sur la façon dont le Canada devrait aller de l'avant dans un monde qui change rapidement. And that's what I'd like to discuss today, how Canada should move forward. What strategy should we adopt in these very challenging and exciting times? The world is changing, as Noella said, at an unprecedented rate. The emergence of India and China as economic powerhouses, new global communication technologies, global warming, the emergence of new infectious pathogens like SARS, something this city certainly is familiar with, the powerful new insights into the workings of the human body are creating tremendous challenges and opportunities for countries like Canada. In a flat world, no country is immune from these global tectonic shifts. We are in a race without a finish line. Let me start by telling you 3 stories. First, 2 years ago, I led a delegation of health researchers to India to discuss the possibility of a research partnership on obesity and diabetes, as it turns out, as you mentioned, Noel. While I was there, I participated in the annual All India Science Congress, an annual meeting of the country's scientists. The meeting was kicked off by the President of India, who spoke for over an hour with slides on everything from space exploration to stem cells to silicone chips. At the front of the immense tent where he spoke sat about 200 high school students who listened intently to everything he had to say. And at the end of the talk, the President gave the students his email address. So I'll give you my email address. And he encouraged them to email him, but on one condition. It had to be a question on science. Story number 2, also about India, later on the same trip. My wife and I had a one-day of sightseeing in Jaipur. During lunch at a roadside restaurant, this enormous elephant came by with sugarcane on its back, and a young boy in sort of the driver's seat on the elephant. And we noticed he had something in his hand, and that something in his hand was a cell phone. Flash forward 1 year, and I'm leading now a group to China. And in Beijing, I meet Dr. Shen Zhu, who's the Vice President for Health Sciences at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And literally, within 30 seconds, we were fast friends. Why is that? Well, we discovered that we each had a very long time common scientific interest in how our blood cells develop, both normally and in diseases like leukemia. I think the lessons from these 3 stories are clear. First, India and China both have their sights fixed on becoming major economic and scientific world players, and they are both convinced they will do that through science and technology and by leapfrogging over 20th century technology. You don't see telephone wires in India. And second, the universal language and culture of science can bridge in an instant the enormous divide that separates 2 men. One born in a small village in the interior of China, of peasant farmers, and the other born right here in Toronto in a middle-class family. I'm reminded of what Louis Pasteur said over 100 years ago: science knows no country. I'd like to develop these and some other ideas in my talk, and I'll start where I actually know something, and that's about health research. The 20th century has been characterized by remarkable improvements in human health virtually everywhere on this planet except sub-Saharan Africa. Longevity in the West has increased by almost 2 years per decade for the past 16 decades. Initially, the result of a combination of good epidemiology, public health, and the discovery of antibiotics and vaccines. Those advances were followed by new insights into the lifestyle origins of heart disease and diabetes, bad diet and lack of exercise, and also the development now of powerful new drugs, starting with the discovery of insulin right here in Toronto in 1921. Cancer treatment is now moving out of the dark ages with the profound new insights into the molecular basis of cancer. New drugs like Gleevec, Avastin, Herceptin, are not just better drugs. They're a paradigm shift. They are based on knowing the most intimate molecular details of what makes a particular cancer different from its normal counterparts. And the technology behind diagnosis is changing just as rapidly and just as profoundly. X-rays have been replaced or augmented by ultrasound, MRI, CT scans, PET scanning, and increasingly gene chips and microarrays are displacing the microscope. This new generation of diagnostics will transform healthcare. It will permit us to prevent or slow down the onset of some diseases before clinical symptoms are even apparent. Diabetes, Alzheimer's, mental illness, heart disease, and some cancers may all become preventable diseases. The sequencing of the human genome has transformed biology and medicine overnight, turning them from a descriptive science into an information science. We are, after all, nothing else but a combination of genetic hardwiring that we inherited from our parents, the millions of years of evolution that molded this information into a coherent and purposeful and highly complex system that is our body, and our experiences, of course, as we go through life. The health research revolution of the 21st century will increasingly be a revolution built on that information, fueled by the new biological insights that give that information coherence and logic. So what lies ahead for health and health care? In my view, there are a number of key drivers that will completely transform our approach to human health and health care delivery. And that transformation will be done by the 5 tables of young people who are with us here today. The first driver will be biology. Biology today has become the most exciting and fast-moving of all the sciences. It's a vortex, sucking in virtually every discipline from electrical engineering to the humanities to help it tease apart and put back together the complexities of our bodies and what it really means to be human. Insights from biology are leading to new therapies, new diagnostics, individualized medicine, including the identification of at-risk individuals. Second, information communication technologies, or ICTs, will drive changes in how we analyze individuals, populations, and our health system. As our population ages, and as we move increasingly from the acute diseases to the chronic diseases of aging, ICTs will serve to link together our homes, our bodies, our electronic health records, our clinics, and our hospitals. Smart homes will monitor our heart rates, whether we've had a fall, and our blood sugar. That information will be processed in real time by computers linked to a family clinic. Third, regenerative medicine, including nanotechnology, bioengineering, stem cells, will transform how we repair, replace defective or worn-out body parts. But I think most profoundly, it will be the synergy that will come from the combination of all those drivers and a heightened sensitivity of our own personalized responsibility that will transform human health and our health system. So let me now turn to what I see as some of the implications of this profound shift in healthcare to a knowledge-based activity. I think the first implication is clear. Healthcare is a huge industry. In our country, it is a $140 billion industry. In the U.S., that number is approaching $2 trillion. China currently spends $60 per person on healthcare. For Canada, the equivalent number is about $4,300. Over the next decade, as China's spending on healthcare goes from $60 to $600, which inevitably will, the healthcare industry in China alone will become an $800 billion U.S. industry. And despite all our complaining and concerns about our own health system, Canada has arguably one of the best and best well-run health systems in the world. That know-how, that knowledge is as exportable and as profitable as lumber or oil. We need to get it into our collective sensibilities that healthcare is Canada's largest knowledge industry, an industry that will experience phenomenal growth worldwide and phenomenal export opportunities over the next 25 years. Second, healthcare is one example, albeit an important one, of the growing centrality of knowledge and knowledge industry to Canada's future. So let me generalize a little bit about that, how I see science and technology, or S&T, going in the future. Back in 1984, our productivity was about 91% of the U.S. productivity. In 2004, it had dropped to 73.7% of the U.S. level. The OECD has written that the increase in U.S. productivity after 1995 was largely due to prior investments in S&T, in science and technology. In other words, productivity is no longer about lowering the unit costs of manufacturing picture tube televisions. Productivity today is about inventing plasma flat screen TVs. Productivity today is not about lowering the unit cost of production of bovine insulin for people with diabetes. Productivity today is about discovering recombinant DNA technology and learning how to produce human insulin in bacteria. And productivity today is not about improving the efficiency of our health system through training fewer doctors and nurses. Productivity today is about the invention and application of new ideas, new technologies, new science that will speed up and improve health delivery. And so if we are to improve our productivity, we must do what India and China are doing, invest in S&T. They are able to do it, you could argue, because they have enormous foreign capital coming in because of their cheap labor costs. But we shouldn't, I think, wring our hands in despair. We are also acquiring huge amounts of foreign capital through our export of natural resources, oil, base metals, lumber, etc., that we are so fortunate to be blessed with. This gift, I think, creates an obligation to our children and our grandchildren to spend the money today that we are receiving today from selling off our natural resources to build a stronger Canada for tomorrow. So what are the implications for Canada if we have no choice but to transform our economy into a knowledge economy? Well, this is interesting. The process of discovery, I think, is itself transforming the nature of competition. In a knowledge economy, in a resource-based economy, scarcity dries up price. The less oil there is, the more expensive it is. In a knowledge economy, it's just the opposite. Software is only useful if it's shared. The first fax machine or the first phone was useless. Think about it. In a manufacturing-based economy, companies compete for market share by lowering unit costs, improving delivery times, reliability, post-sale servicing. But in a knowledge economy, knowledge is the most important commodity. And as Michael Gibbons, the professor at the Science and Technology Research Unit at Sussex University, has very articulately pointed out, the ideas or intellectual property generated in one company or one university frequently acquires value only when combined with the ideas from another company. Companies, universities, countries must therefore strike strategic collaborations in an attempt to create those synergies and complementarities that can only come by merging ideas. This new sort of competition is almost always global in scope, for who knows where the best ideas will come from next. And companies that collaborate in one area are frequently competitors in others. And so in a knowledge economy, competition ceases to be static and becomes dynamic, becoming more outward-looking, striking partnerships, building relationships with anyone, anywhere. And so how should we reach out? How should Canada reach out? In my view, we can reach out, form those relationships, those partnerships that are so critical to our future through the two things that I believe transcend political boundaries, language, and culture. And there'll be no surprise to anybody who's been listening to me so far. The first is the universal aspiration for good health. Everyone on this planet aspires to good health. And second, through science, as my China story illustrated. Science diplomacy, or particularly health science diplomacy, will be a powerful way for Canada to reach out to the world. Importantly, it reflects the very best of Canadian values. Our health system, the importance we place as a country on good health, and a publicly accessible healthcare system. Those values, coupled with the exceptionally strong health research enterprise in this country, and the objective, fair-minded meritocracy and universality that characterizes science, will make health science diplomacy as important a diplomatic tool in this century as Pearsonian diplomacy was in the last century. If French was a language of diplomacy in the 18th and 19th century, science will be the language of diplomacy in the 21st century. If we choose, we can become a health science superpower. We have the scientific credibility, the public health system. We started with others, Doctors Without Borders. We're the countries of Norman Bethune, Lucille Teasdale-Cordy, Tommy Douglas, and Frederick Banning. The third implication for Canada is that in a knowledge economy, geography no longer matters. IBM's supercomputer Blue Gene was put together by teams working in 6 different countries around the world. And so for a city like Toronto to become a knowledge-based hub, proximity to market is no longer the issue. But proximity to the world's best universities and to the best research talent is. Good health care, good restaurants, livable cities, a good public education system, connectivity, all count for more than geography or low labor costs. Accountants in India balance the books of Wall Street stockbrokers while they sleep. We've all heard that story. A surgeon in London, Ontario, can perform an operation in Paris using robotics and satellite communications. We are witnessing the death of distance. Fourth, as Richard Lipsey, Emeritus Professor of Economics at Simon Fraser University, has pointed out, economics was called the dismal science because it assumed, like Newton's second law, that the amount of wealth on the planet was constant. So if I get richer, someone here is going to have to get poorer. We now know, of course, that that's not true. The emergence of India and China as economic superpowers is not threatening the wealth of other people on the planet. On the opposite, it's creating fantastic new economic opportunities for everyone, including countries like Canada. New science is creating that new wealth. And there seems to be no end to new knowledge. Knowledge is not like oil or a piece of capital equipment. Knowledge is not used up, worn out, or consumed. Knowledge and new ideas are different. The more you use them, the more valuable they become. I've already touched on a number of factors: the changing nature of competition, the death of distance, the need to be outward-looking, the common language of science diplomacy, and the opportunities that science and technology is creating for everyone. Let me add just two more points. A successful knowledge economy requires not a well-educated workforce. It requires a highly educated workforce, a workforce that is trained in science and engineering. In the knowledge economy, highly trained scientists and engineers are what The Economist magazine recently called the hottest commodity on the planet. And so we need to place much greater emphasis and resources on early childhood education, and we need to turn young people onto science and mathematics. I hope you're all turned on to science and mathematics. We need to rethink urgently how we teach science to our children so that they can get excited, not turned off, about science. So not only do we have to teach our children, we have to keep them here. We have to attract the world's top scientific talent. Because talent, unlike trees, wheat, oil, or metal, is mobile. Talent will move to where the action is. Second, in Canada, we have focused appropriately so on free trade agreements with various trading partners. And Noella mentioned a talk coming up on free trade. But in an S&T-driven world, free trade has very different consequences than in a commodity-driven world. Free trade in a knowledge economy is about removing the barriers to the movement of people, ideas, venture capital, drug approvals. We need to start thinking about those consequences if we want to build a knowledge economy. To me, science is not about memorizing the periodic table or the parts of a frog, which is what I had to do when I was in high school. Science is a process. Science is simply the most powerful way of looking at the world. It is quite simply also the best way that humanity has come up with to solve important problems. Indeed, some of the greatest opportunities for economic progress will come from helping the world solve its biggest problems: human health, energy, the environment, building sustainable cities. In a speech to the Royal Society in Oxford in November, entitled "Britain's Path to the Future, Lit by the Brilliant Light of Science," British Prime Minister Tony Blair said, and I quote, "Think of the big questions of our time: climate change, the spread of infectious diseases, a safe water supply, biodiversity, terrorism. We need to consult the scientists on every one. If you want to change the world, become a scientist." Unquote. Science is now too important to be left just to the scientists. This means that scientists in our great universities, like the University of Toronto and Ryerson University here in Toronto, cannot be detached from the society that supports them. We need to build new relationships between our universities and the private sector that respects the cultural differences, the differences in values, the differences in mission between the public and private sectors, but still allows strong, well-traveled bridges to be built between them. That's what science and innovation is all about, discovering and applying new scientific ideas, new knowledge to change the world. Real cutting-edge research, though, is tough to do. But transforming science into new products and new policies is even tougher. It's a complex, non-linear process that involves iterative interactions and dialogue between the producers and the users of new knowledge. In Canada, all too often, debates on the future of our country have focused on things like federal-provincial relationships, regional differences, our relationship to the United States, French-English, our history. But I suggest that, as important as those topics may be, to see our future, we need to stop looking in the rearview mirror. We need to start looking forward. We need to start discussing Canada's role in a world that's driven and shaped by science and technology. So let me finish up. I said at the beginning of my talk that Canada is in a race without a finish line. It's a race to build a nation that provides rewarding, challenging careers for our children, that has a sustainable, affordable healthcare system, a leading-edge education system, a strong social net, and that's a paradigm for the planet. To do all of that, we're in a race to generate new ideas and to transform those ideas into economic advantage. So I believe Canada can win that race. I'm a very proud Canadian. But how on earth do you win a race without a finish line? Well, here's my answer. First, you have to enter the race. And second, you have to enter it to win. Thank you for your attention.
We're not going to give you a break. We're going to ask you a bunch of really good questions. I think most of them are from the students.
Good.
Do you believe that the United States has an advantage over Canada in the search for new discoveries in medical research? Can we overcome them, and how?
The United States is a economic and science powerhouse. It's one of the great or only remaining superpowers in the world, and that includes science. The Nobel Prizes a few years ago in every field were won by just American scientists. It's quite remarkable, actually. Having said that, there are some great Canadian scientists from coast to coast in this country, particularly in health research. I alluded to Banting and Best in 1921, but I could go on and list literally dozens of people, Canadian scientists who have made huge contributions to our knowledge of our human body. Stem cells, for example, to name one that's been in the news a lot lately, was discovered right here in Toronto at the Princess Margaret Hospital in the 1960s. That's just one example. So I believe we're a much smaller country, but I believe Canada can punch way above our weight, that we are punching way above our weight in the world of the health sciences. And I think it's a credit to the Canadian health research community that they're able to do that, because science, at the end of the day, is all about critical mass. It's all about funding. And so I think there are some great scientists in this country, and they're doing just a fabulous job.
Thank you. Well, you mentioned the word funding, so my next question is perfect. The recent federal budget projects record levels of spending as a result of major budget increases in many areas. The CIHR sought a $1 billion increase and received less than $50 million. Why is Mr. Harper's government failing to make the necessary investments in health research?
Well, that must have been Dr. Chris Page who asked that question. A couple of answers to that question I could give. The first, of course, is for a research funding agency like CIHR, you never have enough money. You just never have enough money. That's a given. That's number one. Number two, I think you have to look at the big picture. When CIHR started, the day I started as the inaugural president back in 2000, the budget for CIHR was $360 million. It's now, in comparable numbers, $775 million less than 7 years later. That's number one. Number two, in addition to that direct cost for research, universities are now receiving well over $100 million in indirect costs for health research, and there's Canada Research Chairs that go along with that as well. The NCE, Networks of Centers of Excellence program, et cetera, et cetera. So would have I liked more money in this budget? Absolutely. I look at it as a sort of a window. There's a tremendous increase. And I think we will continue to work with this government to convince them of the importance of science and technology. And I think it's a job for all of us who care about Canada. I guess that's been the message of my talk.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. India and China both graduate a lot more scientists and engineers than Canada. If science is the opportunity, how do we get more students in the sciences?
I think we get more students in the sciences by trying to turn kids on to science. I think we need to, and not just, this is not a problem that's unique to Canada. I think every country, United States, the UK, Australia, have exactly the same problem. I don't think we know how to teach science properly to young kids. We do teach it, as I alluded in my talk, we teach it as a bunch of facts, as opposed to really a very exciting way of trying to figure out what's going on in the world. And so I think we need to rethink that. I think we need to recruit outstanding teachers to teach science. I think we have to probably double or triple the salaries we're prepared to pay public and high school teachers to do it properly. I think we need to support our universities at a much higher level than we're doing today. We need to put our money where our mouth is in terms of the importance of science and technology to our country. And kids are, of course, are natural scientists. You know, when you have a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, which Allison's going to have shortly, running around, you're constantly telling them not to do that or not to do that. Don't go near the stairs. Don't touch that hot kettle. Don't do that. Kids are naturally exploring the world around them. And as adults, we're constantly trying to convince them to stop doing that. And so I think somehow we've got to keep them safe, but somehow we have to turn that around and encourage the innate curiosity that we all are born with about the world and translate that into pedagogy in our schools.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alan. There were some great more questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them. I'm now going to ask Alan Udette, President-elect of the Canadian Club, to thank Dr. Bernstein on our behalf. Alan?
Thanks. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to thank Dr. Bernstein for joining us today and for reminding us of a pretty basic truth. A Nobel laureate and Canadian, John Polanyi, once called science the most important thing in the 20th century. He went on to say that young people often ask him in Canada as a country if they were serious about science. And they aren't thinking about passport that they will hold, he said of these young minds, but the country that they must rely on to support or to have support and encouragement. The basic truth is even more relevant to Canada in the 21st century. Disease knows no boundaries, as you commented, and neither does scientific study. The world we now live in presents many challenges, but these challenges should be seen as an opportunity for a country like Canada. In his thoughtful and fascinating and sobering remarks, Dr. Bernstein has reminded us of the importance of focusing on scientific research. He has reminded us that we have an extraordinary luxury in this country, that we have the knowledge and the resources as a society to focus on science and good health. And he has reminded us, most important of all, that we have both an opportunity and an obligation to become international leaders in the area of health science and research. We owe it to ourselves and to our children to do so, and we owe Dr. Bernstein a gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you all for coming today. This meeting is now adjourned.